The clock hit 2:47 a.m. when the first flash of red and blue sliced through my bedroom curtains, painting the walls like some low-budget crime flick. I bolted upright, heart pounding, half expecting a SWAT team to kick down my door. Instead, I stumbled to the window and saw her, Karen, standing on my lawn, arms flailing like a suburban dictator directing traffic, her voice piercing the stillness as she lectured two cops who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. My name's Jake, by the way, and if you're watching this, you've probably already guessed this isn't my first rodeo with the neighborhood tyrant. Before I continue the story, write a comment below. Where are you watching from? Like if you want to constantly win in any conflicts. I yanked on a hoodie and shuffled to the front door, still groggy but curious enough to see what fresh nonsense she'd cooked up this time. The air was crisp, the kind of October chill that makes you wish you'd grabbed socks, and there she was, lit up by the squad car's headlights, her blonde bob practically glowing with self-righteous fury. "Officer, he's parked his truck 3 inches over the line into my guest parking zone," she screeched, pointing at my beat-up Ford like it was a national security threat. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if I'd slipped into some alternate reality where parking spaces were worth a 911 call. Here's the kicker. My truck wasn't even close to her precious driveway. It was parked snug in mine, maybe a hair over the invisible HOA boundary she'd drawn in her head, but nothing that'd block her guests, assuming she had any real friends to invite. The cops glanced at me, then back at her, their faces a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. "Sir," one of them said, his voice flat, "could you just move it a bit? Save us all the headache." I blinked. Move it? At 3 a.m.? For her? I almost laughed, but the absurdity hit me harder than the cold. This wasn't about parking. This was Karen's latest power trip, and I'd been her punching bag ever since I caught her siphoning water from my private well last summer. Yeah, you heard that right. Months ago, I'd noticed my water bill spiking $87 one month, $112 the next. Turns out, Karen had tapped into my well to keep her prize-winning rose bushes alive during a drought, all while preaching HOA rules about community standards. I'd confronted her, and she'd played dumb, twirling her hair and claiming it was an honest mistake. So, I'd fixed it, legally, of course, by rerouting some runoff from my septic system into her sprinklers. Let's just say her garden smelled less like roses and more like regret for a week. She never proved it was me, but the timing? Impeccable. And now, here we were, her glaring at me like I'd personally insulted her entire bloodline. "Officer," I said, keeping my tone even, "my truck's on my property. There's a whole street of parking right there." I nodded toward the empty curb across from her house, a good 50 feet of free space mocking her complaint. Karen's eyes narrowed, her lips pursing so tight I thought they'd disappear. "This is outrageous," she snapped, turning to the cops. "I've lived here 15 years, and I've never had to deal with someone so disrespectful." The cop sighed, scribbling something in his notepad, probably counting the minutes until his shift ended. I leaned against the doorframe, the weight of it all sinking in. This wasn't just a one-off. Karen had been gunning for me since I moved into this cul-de-sac in Raleigh 2 years ago. First, it was my mailbox too faded for her liking. Then, my dog barking at 7 p.m., a noise violation. Now, my truck was her hill to die on. But as she ranted, something clicked. She thought she could keep pushing, keep winning, because no one ever pushed back. Not this time. I straightened up, a slow grin creeping across my face. "You know what, Karen? Call whoever you want. I'm not moving a damn thing." Her jaw dropped, and for a split second, I saw panic flicker in her eyes. She wasn't used to defiance. The cops exchanged a look, clearly done with this HOA soap opera, and one muttered, "Ma'am, we'll file a report, but this isn't an emergency." Karen clutched her phone like a lifeline, already dialing as I turned back inside, the door clicking shut behind me. Through the window, I heard her voice climb to a new pitch. "Yes, hello. I need someone higher up. This is unacceptable." I flopped onto the couch, adrenaline buzzing. She just lit the match, and I was ready to fan the flames. What she didn't know, what I hadn't told anyone yet, was that I'd been keeping tabs on her little games. Photos, timestamps, even an email from the HOA confirming my well was mine alone. This parking stunt? Just the tip of the iceberg. I grabbed my phone, the screen lighting up with a notification, an HOA reminder about the next meeting. Perfect. If Karen wanted a war, I'd give her one. Smart, legal, and so satisfying she'd wish she'd never crossed me. As the sirens faded into the distance, I started planning. This was about to get good. Karen's smug face crumbling as the HOA board flips her own rules against her, all because I turned her petty parking tantrum into a checkmate she never saw coming. That's where this is headed. But first, I had to survive the chaos she'd unleashed that night. The next morning, I woke up to a voicemail that made my coffee taste like spite. "This is Officer Daniels from Raleigh PD. The voice drawled, calm but edged with that "we're not done here" vibe. "We've got a complaint filed about your vehicle obstructing access. Call us back." I stared at my phone, jaw clenched, the absurdity sinking in. Karen hadn't just called 911. She'd doubled down, spinning her tale of woe into an official report. My truck, parked on my own damn driveway, was now a criminal mastermind in her warped little world. I could have laughed if I wasn't so pissed. I chugged my coffee, black, bitter, matching my mood, and stepped outside to check the scene. The cul-de-sac was quiet, sunlight glinting off the dew on my lawn, my truck sitting there like an innocent bystander in Karen's circus. But across the street, her Mini Cooper was angled just close enough to my driveway to make a point. She'd moved it sometime after the cops left, probably thinking she'd trap me into moving mine. Classic Karen, passive-aggressive with a side of delusional. I snapped a quick pic, timestamped 7:32 a.m., and grinned. Evidence, baby. She had no idea the avalanche she'd just triggered. See, I'm not the type to let things slide. I'm Jake Miller, 34, mechanic by trade, and I've fixed enough messes to know you don't let a leak fester. You plug it. Karen had been leaking her entitlement all over this neighborhood since I moved in, and I'd let it go too long. The well incident? That was my warning shot. She'd hooked her irrigation line to my private well behind the shed, caught her red-handed one Saturday when I spotted the hose snaking through the bushes. I'd called her out, and she'd fluttered her lashes, claiming it was for the community garden. Bull. Her roses weren't community anything. So, I'd rerouted some septic runoff, perfectly legal, thanks to a loophole about shared drainage, and watched her freak out when her sprinklers sprayed eau de sewage. She'd never pinned it on me, but the timing? Poetry. Now, though, she'd escalated. Calling the cops over 3 inches of truck tire? That wasn't just petty, that was war. I paced my kitchen, adrenaline pumping, the wheels in my head spinning faster than a torque wrench. I wasn't moving that truck. No way. But I wasn't about to let her keep winning, either. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the HOA bylaws, 57 pages of mind-numbing rules I'd skimmed when I bought this place on Maple Lane. There it was, Section 14.3. No vehicle shall obstruct a resident's driveway access, including guest parking, without prior consent. My truck was clear. Her Mini Cooper, though, teetering on the edge of a violation. I smirked. Oh, this was going to be fun. By noon, my phone buzzed again. Sarah from down the street, a sweet mom of 2 who'd warned me about Karen when I moved in. "Jake, she's at it again," she whispered, like Karen might hear her through the walls. "She's telling everyone you're harassing her guests." I rolled my eyes so hard I nearly saw my brain. "Guests? Sarah, she hasn't had a car over there in weeks." Sarah laughed, nervous but amused. "Yeah, well, she's saying you're the reason her book club canceled last night." "Book club? More like wine club." I thanked Sarah and hung up, my blood simmering. Karen wasn't just coming for me. She was rallying the neighborhood into her pity party. That's when I decided, no more playing defense. I grabbed my phone and started documenting everything. Photos of my truck from every angle, showing it wasn't blocking squat. A shot of her Mini Cooper creeping onto my space. Even a pic of the street, empty as a ghost town, proving her guest parking crisis was a fantasy. I emailed it all to myself, time-stamped and backed up. Then I called the HOA office, voice steady as steel. "Hey, this is Jake Miller at 214 Maple. I've got a question about parking rules. Can you send me the exact wording?" The rep, a bored-sounding guy named Tom, promised to email it over. Step 1, locked and loaded. As the day wore on, I caught glimpses of Karen through my blinds. She was out there, pacing her porch, phone glued to her ear, probably whining to some poor soul about her nightmare neighbor. I could have felt sorry for her, lonely, bored, clinging to control, but then I remembered the $112 water bill and the smug way she'd waved at me after the cops left. Nope, pity was off the table. This was personal now, and I was done letting her run the show. By evening, the HOA email landed in my inbox, confirming what I'd suspected. I was in the clear, and Karen's antics were skating on thin ice. I leaned back in my chair, the tension in my shoulders melting into something else, anticipation. She thought she'd cornered me, but I was just getting warmed up. Outside, her porch light flicked on, casting her shadow across the lawn as she glared toward my house. I raised my coffee mug in a mock toast. Game on, Karen. Game freaking on. Here's the wildest twist yet. Karen didn't just call the cops, she tried to sick the entire HOA board on me, claiming I'd turned our quiet Raleigh street into a hostile zone. But I was 2 steps ahead, and she was about to choke on her own rulebook. The next day hit me like a freight train. I was mid-wrench on a busted carburetor in my garage, grease up to my elbows, classic rock blaring, when my phone lit up with an email from the HOA. Subject line: Urgent. Neighborhood complaint. 214. Maple Lane. My stomach did a flip, but not from fear. Oh no, this was the thrill of the hunt. I wiped my hands on a rag and opened it, the words practically screaming Karen's handwriting. Resident reports ongoing disturbances, including parking violations and intimidation of guests. Please respond by 5 p.m. or face a formal review. Intimidation? Me? The guy who'd spent the last 48 hours dodging her drama? I laughed out loud, startling my dog, Buddy, who'd been napping on a pile of old towels. This was next-level crazy, even for her. I shot a quick text to Sarah, my unofficial spy network of one. You see this HOA email? Her reply buzzed back in seconds. Yep. She's been door to door, saying you're ruining the vibe. Watch out, she's gunning for you. Gunshot imagery aside, I could picture it. Karen in her pastel cardigan, knocking on doors, her voice dripping with fake concern as she spun me into the neighborhood bogeyman. It was infuriating, sure, but also kind of hilarious. Her desperation was showing, and I was the itch she couldn't scratch. I wasn't about to let her paint me as the villain. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through the pics I'd taken, my truck, her Mini Cooper, the empty street. Solid gold. But I needed more. I remembered something Sarah had said weeks ago. Karen's guests were a revolving door of excuses, delivery guys, her cousin from Durham, anyone she could prop up as a victim of my crimes. So, I hopped online, pulling up the HOA's complaint log, public access. Thank you very much. And there it was, 3 reports from her in the last month alone. One about my mailbox leaning too far left, another about Buddy barking at a squirrel, and now this parking nonsense. She was a one-woman complaint factory, and I was her favorite target. That's when the light bulb flickered on. If she wanted to play dirty, I'd play smarter. I fired off an email to Tom at the HOA, casual as could be. Hey Tom, got your urgent note. Happy to clarify, can you confirm if guest parking rules apply to residents' driveways? Also, any logs of repeat complaints from 216 Maple? I hit send, heart racing like I just floored it in a drag race. If I could prove she was abusing the system, her whole poor me act would collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. While I waited, I took Buddy for a walk, partly to clear my head, partly to scope out the enemy camp. Karen's house was a fortress of tacky perfection. Flamingo lawn ornaments, a live, laugh, love sign on the porch, and those damn roses still thriving off my stolen water. As we passed, her blinds twitched, and I swear I saw her silhouette, watching me like some HOA hawk. I waved, big and obnoxious, just to mess with her. Buddy barked, tail wagging, oblivious to the war brewing. Good boy, I muttered, scratching his ears. You're my secret weapon. Back home, Tom's reply was waiting. Guest parking can't block resident access. Your driveway's your call. Complaint logs are confidential, but I'll flag this for review. Bingo. She'd overplayed her hand, and I had the rules on my side. I spent the afternoon beefing up my case, more pics of her Mini Cooper nudging my space, a screenshot of my water bill from last July, $119, thanks to her roses, even a note from the well company confirming it was mine alone. Every click of the shutter, every saved file, felt like loading ammo. I wasn't just fighting back. I was building a fortress of my own. By dusk, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers. Sarah texted again. She's telling people you're getting fined tomorrow. Fined? For what? I stormed to my porch, peering across the street. Karen was out there, chatting up old Mr. Thompson from 210, her hands waving like she was conducting a symphony of lies. I could have yelled, could have marched over and called her out, but that's what she wanted, me unhinged, her the martyr. Instead, I leaned against the railing, the cool wood grounding me, and let the anger simmer into something sharper, resolve. That night, I barely slept, my brain churning with plans. Karen thought she'd cornered me, but she just handed me the keys to her downfall. Across town, the HOA board was probably sifting through her latest sob story, oblivious to the storm I was brewing. I pictured her smug grin, the one she'd flashed when the cops showed up, and my fist clenched. Not for long, Karen. Not for freaking long. Here's the moment Karen's whole world flipped upside down. I walked into that HOA meeting with a stack of evidence so airtight, she didn't just lose, she imploded. But before I got there, I had to dodge her last desperate curveball. The morning after my sleepless night, I was frying bacon, extra crispy, the way I like it, when a knock rattled my door. Buddy bolted upright, barking like we were under siege, and I peeked through the blinds. 2 HOA board members stood on my porch, Linda, a no-nonsense retiree with a clipboard, and Mike, a guy who looked like he'd rather be golfing than dealing with this crap. My gut twisted. Karen had moved fast, and now her minions were here to tighten the screws. I opened the door, grease still on my fingers, and forced a grin. Morning, folks. Bacon's hot. Want some? Linda didn't crack a smile, but Mike's eyes flickered with regret. Jake, we've got a problem, Linda said, her voice clipped like she was reading a court summons. Karen's filed an emergency petition. Says your truck's a safety hazard and you're harassing her guests. We need to inspect it now. Safety hazard? Harassing guests? I nearly choked on the laugh bubbling up my throat. This was Karen's Hail Mary, and it reeked of desperation. Sure, I said, stepping aside with a mock bow. Inspect away. Just don't trip over the evidence I've got piled up inside. They shuffled to my driveway, Linda scribbling notes while Mike paced around my truck like it might confess to a crime. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching them measure the distance to Karen's line for feet, give or take, well within my rights. Across the street, her blinds twitch again. She was glued to this, probably cackling into her coffee, thinking she'd finally nailed me. Little did she know, I'd spent the last 12 hours turning her game into my playground. See, after Tom's email, I'd gone full detective. I dug up an old text from Sarah, dated August 17th, where she'd mentioned seeing Karen's guests park in front of my driveway during her last fake book club. I cross-checked it with my water bill spike and a photo I'd snapped of her hose snaking into my yard. Then I'd called the Raleigh Water Department, sweet-talking a clerk named Emily into confirming my well was private, no shared access, no excuses. Every piece locked into place like a perfectly tuned engine, and I'd emailed it all to the HOA at 3 a.m., labeled for your review. Karen's petition? Just the cherry on top. Linda finished her notes and turned to me, her face unreadable. We'll take this to the meeting tomorrow. Karen's pushing for a fine, $200, and a tow order. My grin widened. She can push all she wants. I'll be there with bells on. Mike muttered something about neighborhood peace, but I waved them off, shutting the door as Buddy nosed my leg for bacon scraps. My pulse was racing, not from nerves, hell no, but from the sheer glee of knowing I was about to flip this script so hard she'd never recover. That afternoon, I prepped like it was game day. Printed photos, highlighted bylaws, even a timeline of Karen's complaints 7 and 2 years, all petty as sin. I threw in a shot of her Mini Cooper from yesterday, parked like a taunt, and a screenshot of the HOA rule she'd broken. No resident shall impede driveway access. She'd handed me the rope, and I was tying the noose. Meanwhile, Sarah texted, she's telling Mr. Thompson you're getting evicted. People are buying it. Evicted? Over a truck? I laughed so hard Buddy barked in confusion. Karen was swinging wild now, and every miss made my case stronger. By evening, the neighborhood was a pressure cooker. I caught snippets through my window, Karen on her porch, voice shrill, rallying her supporters like a suburban general. He's out of control, she wailed to Mrs. Carter from 218, who nodded like a bobblehead. I could have stormed over, set the record straight, but why bother? The real showdown was tomorrow, and I was itching for it. I cracked a beer, sank into my couch, and ran through my plan one last time. Every angle covered, every jab ready. She'd built this stage, now I'd steal the spotlight. Across town, the HOA board was probably sipping decaf, skimming Karen's sob story, clueless about the reckoning I'd packed into a manila folder. I pictured her smug nod as she'd filed that petition, so sure she'd won. My grip tightened on the bottle. She'd poked the bear one too many times, and tomorrow, I'd roar. As the moon climbed high, I toasted the silence. To epic comebacks, I muttered, and Buddy thumped his tail. Round one was mine, she just didn't know it yet. Here's the scene that'll live rent-free in my head forever. Karen's jaw hitting the floor as I slapped down a folder thick enough to choke her ego, turning her HOA throne into a dunce cap. But getting there? That was a roller coaster of pure, unfiltered chaos. The morning of the meeting, I woke up buzzing like I'd downed 6 espressos. My kitchen table was a war zone, photos, bylaws, emails, all fanned out like a poker hand I couldn't lose. Buddy sniffed the pile, tail wagging, as I shoveled oatmeal down my throat. "Today's the day, Bud," I said, ruffling his ears. "We're taking her down." Outside, the cul-de-sac was eerily quiet, no Karen pacing her porch, no blinds twitching. She was probably primping for her big moment, rehearsing her victim speech in the mirror. I smirked, zipping my jacket. She had no clue the freight train coming her way. I rolled up to the HOA office at 9:55 a.m., a squat brick building off Franklin Street that smelled like stale coffee and regret. The meeting room was packed, Linda and Mike from yesterday, 3 other board members I barely recognized, and a dozen neighbors craning their necks for drama. Karen sat at the head of the table, hands folded, her blonde bob gleaming under the fluorescence like she'd just stepped out of a salon ad. She shot me a look, half sneer, half triumph, and I met it with a nod so calm it threw her off. Game face, on. Linda kicked things off, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "We're here to address complaints between 214 and 216, Maple Lane. Karen, you're up." She stood, smoothing her cardigan, and launched into a performance that'd make a soap star blush. "I've tried to be reasonable," she said, voice quivering with fake hurt. "But Jake's truck blocks my guests every day. I can't live like this. It's harassment." She dabbed her eyes with a tissue, and Mrs. Carter gasped like she'd witnessed a crime. I bit my cheek to keep from laughing. Harassment? The woman who'd tapped my well was calling me the bad guy? The board turned to me, and I stood, slow and deliberate, sliding my folder onto the table with a thud that echoed. "Let's cut the theatrics," I said, voice steady but sharp. "My truck's on my property, 4 feet from her line. Here's the proof." I fanned out the photos, time-stamped shots of my driveway, her Mini Cooper creeping over, the empty street mocking her lies. The room went silent, all eyes on the evidence. Karen's face twitched, her mask slipping just a hair. "But it's not about parking," I continued, flipping open the bylaws. Section 14.3, no blocking resident access. Her guests have parked in front of my driveway 6 times in 2 months. Here's the pics. I slid them across, each one a dagger. And let's talk water. Last summer, my bill jumped to $119 because someone, not naming names, tapped my private well. I've got the utility report. I dropped that bomb, and the board's eyes widened. Karen sputtered, "That's a lie," but her voice cracked, and I wasn't done. I pulled out her complaint log, 7 gripes in 2 years, all petty, all me. She's weaponizing this HOA against me because I won't bow down. Her petition? Just the latest stunt. I leaned forward, locking eyes with Linda. "You want to talk safety hazards? Check her roses, they're thriving on my water." The room erupted, neighbors whispering, Mike rubbing his temples, Karen turning redder than her flamingo ornaments. She leapt up, pointing at me. "He's making this up. He's the problem." Linda raised a hand, silencing her. "We've seen enough," she said, voice like steel. "Jake's evidence checks out. Karen, your guests are the violation here, and the well issue? We'll investigate." Karen froze, her smugness evaporating as the board shuffled my photos. "We're issuing you a warning," Mike added, "and a $150 fine for repeat infractions." The gasp from Mrs. Carter was priceless. Karen's cheerleader had just switched teams. I sat back, adrenaline singing in my veins, as Karen stammered, "This is outrageous. I'll appeal." But the board was done. Linda was already stacking papers, Mike avoiding her glare. The neighbors filed out, buzzing with, "Did you see that?" And "She had it coming." I caught Sarah's eye across the room. She flashed me a thumbs up, grinning like a kid on Christmas. Karen stormed past, her heels clicking, and for once, she didn't look back. I'd hit her where it hurt, her precious control. As I walked to my truck, still parked exactly where it belonged, I felt lighter than I had in months. The sun was high, the air crisp, and Maple Lane was mine again. But I knew Karen, she'd lick her wounds and try something new. Let her. I'd be ready, camera in hand, rules on speed dial. This wasn't over, but damn, it felt good to win. Here's the sweetest payback of all. Karen's smug empire crumbled, and I got to sip my morning coffee watching her squirm, knowing I'd turned her own game into her worst nightmare. Welcome to the grand finale, folks. Stick around, because this one's for everyone who's ever wanted to see a Karen get what's coming. And hey, if you've made it this far, hit that subscribe button. I've got more stories where this came from. The day after the HOA meeting, I woke up to a silence so golden it felt like a hug from the universe. No sirens, no shrill rants, just the hum of my coffee maker and Buddy snoring on the rug. I stepped onto my porch, mug in hand, and there it was, Karen's Mini Cooper, parked meekly across the street, nowhere near my driveway. Her flamingo ornaments looked droopy, like they'd caught her defeatist vibe. I took a long sip, the bitter roast tasting like victory, and grinned. She'd finally learned her place, or so I thought. Word spread fast on Maple Lane. By noon, Sarah was at my door, practically bouncing. "Jake, you're a legend," she said, eyes wide. "Mrs. Carter's telling everyone how you shut Karen down. People are calling it the truck takedown." I laughed, handing her a soda from the fridge. All I did was play by the rules, her rules. Sarah shook her head, sipping. "No, you flipped the script. She's been texting the HOA nonstop, demanding a redo, but Linda's not budging." That mental image, Karen furiously typing, her perfect bob shaking, sent me into a cackle so loud Buddy barked in solidarity. I wasn't just basking in the glow, though. I kept my eyes peeled. Mid-afternoon, I caught her sneaking out, glancing my way like a scolded kid. She dragged a hose from her backyard, probably unhooking whatever was left of her well scheme, and I snapped a pic, just in case. Old habits die hard, and I wasn't about to let her rebuild her throne. My phone buzzed. An HOA email confirming her fine and a note that the well issue was under review. Translation? They were digging into her dirt, and I'd handed them the shovel. By evening, the neighborhood was a different beast. Mr. Thompson waved at me from his porch, first time in 2 years, and a couple kids rode bikes past Karen's house, giggling like they'd heard the gossip. Her porch light stayed off, blinds shut tight, a fortress of shame. I leaned back on my couch, flipping through my evidence folder one last time. Every photo, every email, every sarcastic jab I'd held back, it had all paid off. I'd taken her power trip and turned it into a public flop, all without breaking a sweat or a law. That's the Jake Miller way. Fight smart, win big. But here's the kicker. I knew this wasn't the end. Karen's ego was bruised, not broken. She'd stew, plot, maybe even try something dumber, like complaining my grass was 2 inches too tall. So I upgraded my game. I ordered a cheap security cam off Amazon, $49, motion activated, and set it up facing my driveway. If she came sniffing again, I'd have her in 1080p glory. I also emailed Tom at the HOA, all polite, just checking, any updates on that well investigation? Keep the pressure on, keep her scrambling. She'd think twice before crossing me now. As night fell, I cracked a beer and sat on my porch, the October air cool against my skin. Buddy sprawled beside me, chewing a toy while the streetlights flickered on. Across the way, Karen's house was a dark blob. No rants, no schemes, just quiet. I raised my bottle to the stars. To winning the war, one parking space at a time, I muttered and took a swig. The taste was crisp, the moment perfect. I'd turned her chaos into my calm, and damn, it felt good. So what's next? Maybe she'll slip away with her tail between her legs, or maybe she'll rally for round 2. Either way, I'm ready, camera at the ready, rules in my pocket, and a neighborhood that's finally woken up to her stupidity. Write in the comments below. Have you ever beaten Karen at her own game? I want to hear about your victories. And if you're new here, subscribe to fight Karen's crazy HOA together.